been into Australia in quite a while, and really enjoying myself down here. I want to thank Nick and team for inviting us to come speak and asking me to share a little bit about how we are seeing the world right now from Pandora, how we think we can build a better ecosystem around streaming, and what the challenges and the opportunities are in this new world. So also wanted to give a shout out to, in case you don't know him or haven't dealt with him, Thomas Heyman, who's running things for us down here in Australia. He's running the Music Maker programs for us. And if you haven't dealt with him or haven't gotten to meet him, let's definitely get acquainted with him later on today. So when I was asked to do this talk a couple of months ago, I started out telling Nick about all the things that Pandora could do. And Nick and team came back to me and said, don't make this an infomercial for Pandora. So that took me aback, because I've actually spent the last couple of years being sort of an evangelist for Pandora and sort of teaching the music industry in the United States, and working with them to figure out how we work together best. But taking a step back, and when I had to come up with a topic, I thought, well, really, what are we after here? We're really trying to figure out, how do you break an artist in the new streaming environment? That's the big challenge that labels and management and artists and all the stakeholders in the music industry are facing right now. So I figured a couple of months ago that if I went and I asked around the industry, I would probably be able to get some really good answers on what it means to break an artist and how people are breaking artists in the new streaming environment. So it wasn't all that easy, actually, because it's not because artists aren't breaking, but because it's really hard to get a definition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through my journey to define breaking. I'm going to run you through the challenges and the opportunities that we've found. I'm going to name some names of people who are doing it correctly and people who could be doing better. And I'm not going to throw a whole lot of statistics at you, because I've only got about 25 minutes. So the first question, what does breaking mean in 2016? I've been at Pandora for about 2 years, and the first thing that everybody asks me when I go into a label especially is how are you going to help us break an artist? And since we're listener and data driven, it's not always that straightforward an answer. Putting a song onto Pandora is not straightforward. You don't just sort of press a button and make it a hit. We do actually expose new artists to 45 listeners for every one who actually goes in search of the artist, but it's still not all that straightforward. On the flip side, what I wanted to do, and what I always do when I go back and talk to these people, I ask them, well, what does breaking mean? What do you mean? What does it mean to break an artist? You're asking me how I'm going to do it, but let's also figure out let's define the rules here, and what does it mean to break an artist? So in the United States, it's pretty straightforward usually, Billboard top 10. And that's generally, if you ask a radio guy or a radio-driven major label, that's what they're going to tell you. It's get it into the top 10, and you've got a breaking record. But what about the rest of us? The question is, how do we take developing artists who aren't necessarily given the backing of radio, of terrestrial radio? How do we break them? So I asked around, and I asked all these people to tell me what it means, and they all thought long and hard, and they came back with some pretty strange answers. There were a lot of people answering the same way. This one sort of distills it. It was a major label exec who recited a long list of songs that he'd broken this week, or this year, and said, broken a lot of songs, but we haven't broken an artist. This is kind of typical. So, they were selling out shows, they were showing up on streaming charts, but it always came back to there's no radio hit. This is really smart people that we were talking to, and they all had the same sort of answer, which was no matter how much they thought the artist was breaking, they wouldn't say it was breaking until it was a radio hit. So we really need to get beyond this, and this is a real challenge for us. So I wasn't getting satisfaction from a label, so I went to managers and got a bunch of answers sort of like this. So finally, went to a booking agent, went to one of the smartest guys that I know in booking, which is a guy named Bond Stein, who works for the Windish agency. I don't know if you've worked with him, but if you're working in the United States Windish is a great booking agency, and Rob is one of the smartest guys in the business. So he, one of the most precise people, said, it's undefinable feeling. For some artists, it's just when people they don't know start coming to the shows, or for others, it takes stadiums. And then he said, but seriously, 3 Terminal 5s. So Terminal 5 is a 3,500 seater in New York. The definition of breaking for a very smart guy from Windish was 3 Terminal 5s, which is great for us because Pandora ran a promotion last year with an upcoming act called Odessa, and we managed to sell out 3 Terminal 5s. And this was coincidental. It was great. I didn't prompt him to say this, but now we're starting to get somewhere. Now we're starting to figure out, like, what does breaking mean? But still, it's not really very satisfactory. And I may come back to you and ask some of you what you think breaking is and how do we help define it. But I didn't really get satisfactory answers, so I have a whole presentation to give, and what was I going to do with it? So I figured what I'd do is outline some of the challenges and some of the opportunities in the new streaming marketplace, because it's very, very hard to define breaking. So let's talk about challenges versus opportunities. So probably the biggest challenge we're all facing right now in the music business writ large is the decline of unit sales. So barring a zombie apocalypse, unit sales are probably not coming back to where they used to be. I think there's a place for unit sales, and certainly at Pandora we're helping drive them as well. But I was on the label side of this before I came to Pandora 2 years ago. I was at Columbia Records and was looking at sort of a decline of unit sales and sort of had to make a decision. Which side did I want to be on when this happened? Did I want to be on the side that was sort of fighting a rearguard action against it, or did I want to jump over to the other side and help my label friends figure this out from the streaming side? And that's really, really why I'm here. But unit sales decline is a real problem. It's the world we live in, and we've got to figure out. But unit sales decline is counteracted by another phenomenon, which is the frictionless consumption that streaming allows. Friction's kind of gone now. You know, this started out really with YouTube about 20 years ago. I think some people would say it started with Napster, but or 10 years ago, I'm sorry. But it really did start with YouTube. In 2005, I was working at Virgin Records, and we would put our videos up on Yahoo. And I remember my greatest moment with Yahoo at Virgin Records was a Bubba Sparks video, Ms. New Booty. And Ms. New Booty got 1 million views in a 7-day period, and we were absolutely ecstatic. This is 2005. Then YouTube comes along. By 2013, when I was at Columbia Records, if we got 1 million views on a video in a day from a developing artist, we would be very disappointed. So we are in this frictionless environment. People are consuming more. We expect them to consume more. How do we extract the value out of this? So the thing to remember, and the thing that we're really, really trying to help people out with, and trying to make sure that people understand in the frictionless environment, what you're solving for in this frictionless environment is an addressable audience. You want the audience to be big, and you want to be able to have access to that audience. That's the key. It's not all that different from the way you work with social media, whether it's Facebook, or whether it's Instagram, or whether it's any of the other platforms that are coming up. But the great thing about streaming services, and it's not just ours, it's everybody's, is that when people are addressable on that platform, they're actually listening to the music, and they've actually said, I care about that artist, and it's actually in the context of their interacting with the artist when you reach these people. So the frictionless consumption thing is a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity for this addressing these audiences. So another problem, another challenge, is market fragmentation. On the demand side, there are about 600 artists on Pandora who have spun a minimum of 500 million times. That's a lot of artists. How do you stand out in that big environment? Now, that's also a lot of scale and it's a lot of listening, but how do you stand out? Next BIGSOUND calls these artists epic, and they include big superstars like Adele, Kanye, Beyonce, people with only one name. But for every one of those, there's another epic artist who might not be a household name. So in hip hop, I'll just name a couple. Young Thug and Rich Homie Quan are actually spinning as much as these top artists. on Pandora and also on other streaming platforms. So what you've got is this market fragmentation. You have to figure out how to deal with it. So, but on the other hand, what you've got is the ability to target these fans directly. So that's what you want to do, and that's what streaming services need to be providing you. They need to be providing the ability to target those fans directly, to drive more consumption, to drive more sales of other SKUs and revenue streams. And we're really able to do this, but not everybody has built those tools. And this is something that everybody in the music industry really deserves. It's something that's a real core value of what we're doing at Pandora. I think actually a couple of the other streaming services are doing it very well too. But it's something that everybody, this is a directional thing. There are a lot of ways to do this, but it's sort of a core challenge and a core goal that everybody should be after. Another challenge, flat world competition. Now this is a little different than market fragmentation. It's the number of artists that are actually spinning on the various streaming services versus what used to be spinning on terrestrial radio, or what is spinning. So just for example, and I'm calling a Pandora number because I have access to the Pandora number, we spin 100,000 artists a month. Terrestrial radio spins about 21,000. So there are about 80,000 artists who, if you're on the 21,000 side, you're now competing with. On the other hand, if you're on the 80,000 side, you're in a place where you never got to be before. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And the opportunity is flat world access. So all 100,000 of those artists actually have access to tools that they didn't used to have before. Hermitude and Justin Bieber now have addressable audiences that they can directly access through streaming services and through the tools that we're creating. So that is a huge opportunity, and the Hermitude is a great example of an artist that's taken great advantage of this. So that's the opportunity versus flat world competition, flat world access. So the other challenge in streaming, another one, is access to capital. So labels have traditionally paid for and marketed records. That's the way the business has worked for years and years and years. And labels are under a lot of stress right now. Labels, everybody understands this. It's the existential issue that those of us who've worked at labels for years and years have been dealing with for really the last 15 years, but really specifically in the last 5 years. Access to capital through traditional label channels is getting tougher and tougher. It's tougher to be a label. It's tougher to find the money. It's tougher to know when the money's going to come in. It's tougher to figure out how quickly you're going to be able to recoup. On the other hand, what you've got now on the artist side is more artistic control and leverage. So a good example of this is Frank Ocean. So if you I don't know, is everybody familiar? Has everybody studied what's happened with Frank Ocean in the last couple of weeks? He had a record that he put out on Apple through Universal, and quickly followed it when his deal was up with his own record, on which he was able to recoup a lot more of his, a lot higher royalty. So this is really controversial. It's probably not going to be the rule. Frank Ocean built his career with the help of a major label. On the other hand, he's built up enough leverage so that now he can pretty much run his own business. So this again it's going to put pressure on a lot of people and a lot of stakeholders in the industry. I think it will find its own level. These things usually do. But what the good news for the artist is that, with streaming and with all of these new sort of business models, there's a lot more control that the artist can assert in their career. So it's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. And don't get me wrong, the labels are never going to go away, and they shouldn't. Nobody else will take the risk. That's a really key point. I've been in the business for 25 years, and people have been predicting the demise of record labels for pretty much the entire time I was going to be here. They've been throwing bats at them, and they've been beating them up. But really, when it comes down to it, those are the guys who are actually spending the money, taking the risks, and maintaining the standing army of marketers. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this whole leverage in the new streaming environment plays out. So, so those are the challenges and the opportunities. I wanted to talk a little about who actually is playing well in this new environment, you know, and what can we learn from these people? Because there are a lot of artists who are thriving already, and they're thriving because they're open to the new environment, because they're looking at the platforms for what they offer, and are trying to be a little less concerned over things that probably aren't going to come back, like unit sales. You know, the unit sales thing is bigger than all of us. It really did start with Napster. You know, those of us in the streaming community are actively working to try and find a solution for this. And I just want to run through a couple of names and a couple of examples of people who, you know, have been doing it right and using it to thrive. So I'm going to start with a familiar one, which is Floom. Floom has sort of embraced us, and these are, I'm going to actually run through a bunch of Pandora examples because you know, we have firsthand experience with these guys. But Floom has done very, very well with Pandora. We ran in particular a concert ticket promotion with Floom, and in the U.S. And we one of the things that we found when we started putting together the Music Maker group at Pandora was that, you know, basically we're building a marketplace here where we're bringing together artists and their fans. What we did was we took a whole step back and we said, what value lies in this? Like, where can we extract the value? There's royalties for sure. There are, you know, there's enabling sales, but there's also enabling ticket sales, merch sales, and all of these things that are outside the normal purview of just pure recorded music. We did last year a Floom ticket sale promotion with Floom and his team. We ended up just by accessing the fans that Floom had on Pandora, and this is not going outside, this was not using social media. We managed to sell 20% of their tour tickets through just direct messaging his fans. The pre-order with the stream was sold 14 times what the actual promoter's own pre-order had sold. So that was just an experiment. We didn't even know what we were getting into there. But what that took was the active participation and sort of risk-taking of the team to come in and work, you know, and say, look, this streaming thing, there's something there. There's a big audience. How are we going to extract the value out of it? So that's one perfect example of how it would work. I'm going to run a little more closely. G-Eazy, you might be familiar with G-Eazy. He's a rapper based in Oakland, Pandora's hometown. His manager identified long before he was on the radio that he was blowing up on Pandora. They doubled down. We did a bunch of premieres. We did a bunch of shows with him. Subsequently, they used that as a springboard for radio. So this is a place where streaming was not competing with radio, and they didn't just work with us. They also worked with Spotify and the other streaming services as well. But they used streaming as a springboard to radio to get G-Eazy on the radio and to blow him up even bigger. Hermitude's another one, another good local example. Hermitude took advantage of a full suite of products, including premieres, including direct fan messaging, and all of the tools that were available to them through us and also through the other services to develop a much bigger footprint in the U.S. than they would have had otherwise. So right now, just on Pandora alone, Hermitude has 175,000 addressable people that they can message at any time if they want to. And the other thing that's interesting about streaming and streaming radio, and this is a key distinction between streaming radio and straight up on demand. Streaming radio tends to spin things longer. So right now, you know, Hermitude, you know, the buzz, you know, has been a hit for quite a while. it's still spinning 2 million times a week on Pandora. And that's because the streaming radio tends to hold on to things longer than terrestrial radio did. Terrestrial radio has a traditional 12-week cycle and then it goes. What we're finding, and one of the first things that I found when I got to Pandora, was that things stick around for a year. This is actually going to fundamentally alter cycles, because if you've got a single that's going to be spinning for 6 months to a year on the radio or on a streaming service, you've got a much longer window to exploit things, to tour, to go back, to hit different segments of audience, the people who were the early adopters, the people who were the mid-level adopters, and then the people who were the late adopters. These are all insights that we're all learning. And the way that you learn those insights, about those insights, is actually by engaging with the data. And this was never possible before streaming. Now that all the streaming services are starting to share data, or the ones that are starting to share data, and that's a key point that I'll get to in a minute, you're actually able to go back to the well and able to segment artists and learn all this stuff. And we're not learning this stuff ourselves. We need actually to engage with artists and managers to extract all the insights to make a better product, but also to enable people to build new models, to extend cycles, and to hopefully make a better financial proposition for the artist overall. I'm going to name a couple of management companies that are doing it correctly. Vector Management, based in Nashville, has been a very, very good partner for us. The thing that the managers were the first people really to really embrace streaming, and if you are a manager, I hope you are doing it, because it'll help all of your revenue streams. Another management company that has been very, very aggressive is Crush Management. They manage SIA. They also did something last year that I don't think anybody thought that it could do, which is that they resurrected the mid-aughts emo bands. They resurrected Fall Out Boy. In the United States, last year, one of our booking people came to me and said, well, we're going to book Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco for our Christmas show. And I'll admit that I was not the smartest guy in the room at that moment, but my question was, is that still a thing? And the answer was, it was a thing. And the reason that people knew it was a thing is because of streaming, because people were going back and listening to these guys, and they still had huge numbers on streaming. Now, terrestrial radio never would have told you that. And a unit sales environment through brick and mortar wouldn't have been able to give you that kind of insight. It's really fascinating to have seen what happened. You have Fall Out Boy came back with a #1 record. Blink 182 came back with a #1 record. People didn't realize how big these artists were until they could see the ongoing streaming numbers on Pandora and Spotify and everywhere else. So this is and Crush in particular was very, very smart about that. Another management company that does it well and should be studied if you are managing is Red Light. Red Light was probably the first company that I knew of when I was back actually at the label. They were pushing me. They were pushing me to work with Pandora. They were pushing me to work. They were pushing me on Spotify numbers. They were pushing me on everything streaming, because they realized that streaming was going to drive their business. So Red Light is definitely a company you want to be studying as well. Cobalt. We'll go back for a second. Cobalt. Cobalt are the industry model for transparency. Cobalt is really, really important. In the streaming world, you deserve transparency. Transparency is basically everything, because streaming is real time. If you do not have visibility into what's going on in your streaming, your insights aren't worth anything, and you can't act fast enough. Cobalt has been a great partner to us, but Cobalt is also a company that, if you don't know too much about them, definitely look into them, because they are the transparency and the data that they provide is leading the industry. Windish and Paradigm, I quoted Bond Stein before, also have been very, very good partners and understand that aggregated audience is potentially a gold mine. And they've built the data, they and Vector and companies like that have built a data analytics infrastructure that is putting them way out in front in terms of being able to take advantage of the audiences that are being driven by streaming. And then finally, yep, Universal Music Group. They are actually doing it right. They have a very, very sophisticated operation that's run out of Nashville that is looking at streaming numbers globally, their own artists that are not yet signed, and they're also looking at ways and studying and putting the hard work into figuring out how do you break an artist online. Now, again, I can't even get those guys to tell me what's a breaking artist online, but Universal is definitely putting the time and investment into it, and it's also something that, you know, to be studied. So those are the ones who are doing it right. And I'm going to go through a bunch of ones who should be doing it better. And I'm going to start with streaming services. I'm going to start with Pandora. We can do more. And so can our competitors. If you're not getting shared data from a streaming service, you're being underserved. And you're really not, they're not giving you what you rightfully deserve. There is a tendency in the streaming universe, and some parts of it, and I shall leave them nameless, to compete on exclusives, and that really works at the very tippy top of the pyramid, but it doesn't work down in the trenches where we need to develop artists. So if you're not getting your data, you're being underserved by a streaming company, and you deserve better. And we in Pandora are trying to lead the way with that. The major labels can do better. There is still a lot of work to be done to get people into thinking about streaming and not only really about radio promotion. I think it's a tough thing if you're at a label. You've been successful doing radio, and you've been successful marketing the way you've been marketing for about 25 years, or 50 years for that matter. It's very tough to make that change, and we on the streaming side need to lead people through that. Indie labels have the same issue, and we understand this, and we're incredibly respectful of it. And we've had most of our best successes working with indie labels. Indie label challenge is that you're working without a net. You don't have necessarily, you know, big artists that are going to pay all the bills if you make a mistake. So this is, you know, indie labels could be doing it better, but they are definitely challenged as well. There's just no room for error. If you're an established radio artist, you need to be looking at what's next, because today's established radio artist is tomorrow's forgotten radio artist. Actually, and sometimes the radio artists also who may be successful, you know, going forward, are really not looking at the business. And I've been in the business long enough to have been at labels where hugely successful artists who did not maintain their fan bases or maintain data sets on their fan bases came back in a newly changed world, maybe even in the space of a year or 18 months, and were not able to address their audiences. So established radio artists really, really need to be careful to make sure that they're going to stay established by watching their data and using it. Same thing with new radio artists, people who have big hits. They really, you know, you need to collect the nuts while they're falling off the tree. Just get a big blanket and collect those nuts, and those nuts are data. Collect your nuts, people. Finally, legacy artists. Legacy artists definitely need to take care of business in the same way. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to run through this really quickly. Ticketing agencies. Ticketing agencies, like streaming agencies, need to be sharing data with you. You deserve it. Booking agents. Booking agents are going to do it better, and they're starting to, but we need to work with them. And then most of my favorite artists could be doing it better. Unfortunately, I like indie artists. Indie artists don't always have it together, and we're really working hard to make sure that they have good options for streaming. So I'm going to skip through. What does breaking mean in 2016? The punchline is, I know it when I see it. Justice Potter Stewart that was his answer when he was asked in the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1970s, what is the definition of pornography? He said, I know it when I see it. A breaking artist, the best thing we can come up with is I know it when I see it. So what should you be looking for? And I'm going to run through this really fast. In the streaming environment, this is what you should be looking for. You should be looking for someone who's going to help you with all aspects of your business, including royalties, but not limited to that. Touring, merchandise. unit sales, and sponsorships. Somebody who's going to be transparent with your data, share it with you. Somebody who's going to help turn that data into insights that are going to help you with your business, because every artist is different. And someone who's going to create and drive revenue opportunities beyond, and I say again, including royalties. And that means sponsorships, and that means figuring out new ways to make money beyond just the recorded music income. So that's it. Thank you very much. I hope that was enlightening. Thanks for sitting here and listening.